believe we're good. It's recording. Well, thank you for joining us today at Sitecore User Group, Jordan. We are looking forward to hear you talking about the Sitecore Search. I know it's a little bit late for you, so thank you so much. And please go ahead.
Sure, thanks for having me. I don't think I've presented at the User Group Jordan before, so it's another one I can tick off my list. As you said, so we're going to be digging in a little bit to Sitecore Search today. And I'm going to be talking through a real-world build that the developer advocacy team, which I lead, completed earlier this year. So my name is Rob Earlam. I've been in the Sitecore community for most of my career. Worked for Sitecore for 8 years now in a variety of different roles. As I mentioned, currently I'm leading the developer advocacy team here. You can see a wide variety of social links on the screen here. It's pretty funny. Every time I do a session, I seem to have to add a new one. They seem to crop up pretty fast at the minute. But if you want to get hold of me, you can find me across all those different places. So what are we going to cover today? Well, we're going to talk a little bit about the developer portal, which is where we implemented Sitecore Search. We're going to look into what federated search is. We're going to talk about the different widgets that were implemented on the portal. We're going to look at the different index sources that we use, which is where we're pulling all the different data in from. We're going to look at the events integration, so how we're sending data about how the users are using search back into the platform. We're going to talk a little bit about the Sitecore Search React SDK, which is what we use to build out the integration. And then finally, I'll talk through some of the challenges we faced on the project. So let's dive in. First of all, what I want to say is everything I'm going to show you today is live. We launched, as I said, a couple of months back. If you go to developers.sitecore.com, you can go and try all of this for yourself. First of all, though, I kind of want to talk a little bit about why search was a good fit for the dev portal. And if we look at what our developer portal is used for, it's basically most of the content listed there isn't actually hosted on the portal itself. Instead, it's kind of seen as a shooting off point, allowing developers to quickly find what they need across all the different Sitecore content repositories that we have out there. We had a simple search implementation already, but we realized we could vastly improve on that by using Sitecore Search. So the first thing we did was we kind of sat down and we figured out how we wanted this experience to work. So when you first go along to the developer portal, you're presented with a search bar that looks something like this. The user will then enter their search term, something that they're interested in. In this case, how do you migrate from XM to XM Cloud? What happens then is that search will be performed against all of the different content repositories all at once. This is what's known as federated search. It's the ability to enter a single search term that's performed then against a variety of content sources, and all the results from all of them are returned in one combined data set. Now, obviously, we don't go and search all these sources live when you enter your search term, because that'd be super slow. It wouldn't be any good. Instead, what happens is Sitecore Search basically goes and indexes each of these different content repositories and stores a different index for each of these. And when you do your search, it's those indexes that we're querying because we can get really fast results from them. Really, at a high level, that's kind of how the data is leveraged. But we actually use that then in a few different ways on the site. The first one is the preview search widget. So what happens when you actually interact with that search box is the first thing you'll see is the preview widget, which looks like this. And the idea here is to kind of quickly surface content that the AI in search thinks is most likely to match the user's search terms. So you can see here, the user searched for XM Cloud, and there's two different types of suggestions being made. You've got the left-hand pane with the light blue background, and this provides suggested kind of extension terms to help further refine the search. So by that, it means basically what other words, other key phrases can we add on to the end of XM Cloud to help narrow down what it is the user is looking for. So you can see it suggesting things like XM Cloud FAQ or XM Cloud Embedded, which would probably lead you towards embedded personalization, for example. The right-hand side with the white background, that shows the top 6 articles that most closely match the term that you've entered. All of this really, though, is designed to help a user get to what they're looking for really as fast as possible. So if one of those articles that are listed in these 6 here is what you're looking for, And you can click on it and be taken straight there. And it's a really fast way of finding what you're after. However, realistically, we're not always going to hit the mark with that. So if it's not presented in here, then the user can go and do a full search. So, they click the little magnifying glass or they hit enter, and that's when they're taken through to the full search results page. This is where all the results here are displayed and allowing the user to interact with it. So this is all powered by Sitecore Search. It lets the users page through the different result sets and basically drill down to find what they're looking for. The great thing about this is that it's all controllable and customizable from within the Customer Engagement Console, or CEC, which is the back end for search. So, for example, we can configure the faceting. So not only what values are displayed for the facets, but even which facets are entirely displayed. We can configure things like the sorting as well. You can see it's listing suggested there currently. We can build out custom sort configurations. All of this in the back end of search, publish the changes, and they're immediately available on the site. You don't have to get a developer involved at all. Okay, so I think that's kind of enough about well, how it works. Let's take a look at it in action. I'm gonna hop over to my browser, and this is Sitecore's developer portal. Hopefully, some of you have seen this before and used it. But when you come along, you basically click on search, as I said, and your preview search is loaded for you. Really, at the minute, we've not given the AI anything to work on it. It's a complete shot in the dark here. So it's making kind of a best guess of what it thinks we could possibly be looking for, but it doesn't really have anything to go on. That's the thing. So we can help it. We can start to enter some data. So how about we enter OrderCloud, a Sitecore's commerce platform. Now you can see it started to narrow down the results that are being returned. You can see it's added some suggested terms in here. Are we looking for OrderCloud environments? Are we looking to OrderCloud portal dashboard dark mode? It comes up with a heap of different suggested terms. You'll also notice as you hover over these terms, the articles here, these top 6 articles, they refresh to match that new search term you've highlighted. You can also see in action here where these articles are coming from different locations. I'll go back up to this one's a good example. Here you can see we have an item from Sitecore Stack Exchange. We have a video from YouTube. Lots of different content from different locations. I'm just happy with OrderCloud for now. This isn't matching exactly what I'm after. So I'm going to go and I'm going to hit enter, and we're going to perform a full search here. That takes us over to the search page itself. And here you can see a search page, which is pretty standard for most search pages that we would have used on the internet. You can see we have all our results listed here, and we have our facets here, allowing us to refine what it is we're looking for. So I've searched for OrderCloud. Let's say I know it's a piece of documentation I'm looking for. I can go and select the OrderCloud documentation facet, and now that'll refine only to items in the OrderCloud documentation site. We could also change the sorting as well. So we knew it's a new document that's just been published. We could then change the sort order to go and refine to only showing the newest items first. On top of this, we can scroll right the way down, and it also has pagination built in, allowing you to then go and step through the results, seeing them all in action. So this is basically how search works on the developer portal. It's pretty straightforward. I mean, I'm sure lots of you have used a search implementation like this on other sites. But let's take a look at how it's actually configured. Okay. So what we're going to look at, we're going to look at all of this, in the CEC shortly. But I just want to talk through what it is we configured first. Basically, when you start with search, the first thing you're going to have to do is define your attribute definition. And this is basically where you specify all the fields that you want to index for all the different index sources that you're working with. So if you think of, for example, we have YouTube videos there, and we also have GitHub repositories indexed. They're going to have wildly different fields for each of those indexes. A YouTube video may index the length of the video, for example. A GitHub repository could index the language which the source code is written in. Those fields wouldn't apply to the other one. You wouldn't need a video length on a repository. You may need a language on the video if it's about one, but not all the time. This set of attributes here, though, has to be the superset of all attributes across all your sources. So this is a set of everything. You don't have to populate every attribute for every source, but every attribute you want to populate has to be listed here. And if you look through the table, you can see some pretty standard field types in there. We've got a data type, so we can store things like strings, integers, heaps of other different types. And then we have the checkboxes at the end, which I'm going to go into shortly when we look into it, which controls how that attribute is actually. So once we've configured this, we can then start to configure our index sources themselves. You can see we have some index sources listed here, and it shows the number of documents that have been indexed for that source. It shows the type of connector that it used. We generally use a mixture of API connectors and web crawlers. So the web crawler is where Sitecore Search will go and load a URL from a site that you give it. It'll then download the DOM and any anchors that it finds in the DOM. It'll go and follow that anchor and it'll download the page for that one. And you set the depth for how far through the DOM you want it to walk and how many anchors deep you want it to go. Well, that's how it basically goes and crawls through the website to find all of the content. API crawler on the other side is where you can make requests to an API to get the data back. I think we use this, for example, on YouTube. They have a good API to go and help us find content really easy for our Discover Sitecore YouTube channel. And that worked much better for us than actually going through the web crawler. You can see the status of the index here as well. Most things are working here. We're still working on a new version of the community index to change how that functions. But yeah, you can see it's quite easy to basically choose which indexes are and aren't in use and to work on them in the back end. Once you've actually configured all of this and got it working, the other side of the functionality you get with Search is the analytics side. And as I mentioned, we launched this a few months back. So we started to get some really good analytics data in there. It's nice to see how people are using the site. One of the things we'll look at surely is keyword analysis, which I quite like. And that allows you to basically get a real in-depth report on what keywords people are searching for. And it's really useful. So if you find that heaps of users are all searching for one term, then it means you've probably got a problem in your information architecture. And you can basically try and bubble content up, or content that keyword's referring to, higher in the IA, make it more visible, make it easier to find, help users get what they want faster, basically. I mentioned earlier that this is built with the new Sitecore Search React SDK. I'm not going to go too much in the development side of this today. I'm not going to show any code, but the dev portal is a Next.js application. So we were a good fit to be beta testers of this new SDK. It's very similar to the Discover SDK, if anyone's used that. Search always been an updated version of the Discover platform. This is still in the process of being built out, but it hugely reduced our development time. It made it so easy to integrate. The NPM packages are available to use today, though. If you download the developer portal repository, you can set it up and see it in action there. Because it's still being built, though, we haven't actually got any documentation published yet. Storybook, for any of you who haven't done that, it's a nice interactive way of seeing UI primitives and interacting with them in the browser and seeing them work in a test bed kind of thing. We'll have an instance of that coming for the SDK as well. Realistically, I'd probably recommend holding off using it yourself until those two come, because you're going to be on your own a little bit without them, but it's not far off at all. Okay, so I think it's probably time we hop back to the browser and take a look at how some of this is configured. So this is the search backend for anyone who hasn't seen it before. This is the Customer Engagement Console, or CEC. And basically, when you first log in, this is the view that you're presented with. You get some high-level analytics for how people are using the site. So you can see, it's a couple of days, or it's about a day or so behind, I think. But you can see we generally have a lot of users during the week. And then this tails off a little bit when it gets to the weekend, because it's a development site. Most people do their work during the week. What I want to do, though, is start to look through how all this is configured. So I'm going to go over to the administration section first. And then I'm going to go into my domain settings for this domain that I'm working on, which is the Sitecore developer domain. We're going to go over to the attributes here. And this was the screenshot I showed you before, where it basically allows us to configure all the different attributes that's possible to populate for our index sources. And we've got some really common ones you'd expect. The things like, the name and the title of the article. That's a string, obviously, because, that's textual data you're going to be storing in there. We have, what else we have here? We have things like the index name. So the name of the source that it's coming from. That's basically a developer-friendly version of the name. So no white spaces, underscores in a name that allows us to check that in code if need be. Then we have the same data stored in a friendly way in site name. So that facet that we saw before, that's where it's got the friendly name with the correct white space in there and capitalization and everything. So it's friendly for the end users to see. Heaps of different data types available. You can have strings, you can have arrays of strings, integers. A composite is an object, so JSON objects. You can have arrays of objects. Where things get interesting with these checkboxes over on the right-hand side, though. So these are all quite important because these control how those attributes are actually used. Now, the first one's pretty self-explanatory. Anything with a check in the required field means that has to be populated. So we have a content type field. We specify things like articles for documentation, a repository for any GitHub repos, video for YouTube videos, and so on. And so that's a required field for us. We want to make sure we always know what it is we're actually indexing and then displaying to the end user. The ID, obviously, you need to have. The index name and the site name as well. Again, very important for us because we need to know where that data came from. An interesting one here is returning API response. So before, when I made a request to the search results page or to the preview search page, it makes a request, obviously, over to search and gets JSON back with all of those different search results. This checkbox here controls what data for each of those search results is returned. You can see we have like the title returned. I think we've got description somewhere in here. There's an image URL. There's the site name. All of these things which are used to populate that row in the results set. The thing I find interesting about this one is the top one, the body. So we don't have that set to returning the response, and for good reason. When I did my search for AutoCloud before, I want to go and do a full text search across the body of all of the different documents that are indexed for us. So I want to have that data saved. I want to save that into the index for me to search against. However, I do not want to return that in the API response. Otherwise, if I have 25 search results coming back, I'm going to have 25 entire pages worth of HTML coming back as well. And it's just going to massively balloon out my message size. And it's just going to run so slow, it's not going to be usable. So that's one thing to bear in mind here, is you can have data stored for crawling time and available at search time, but you need to be careful what you're returning back in the response is pretty lean to be able to maintain that performance. Moving along, we have facets as well. So remember, we had the 3 facets we looked at on the site before. So content type, so you can refine by videos, forum posts, video, articles, anything else you want to search for. And then we have the products. So some of the sites where possible, we tag by product. So we'll take a look at that shortly. So allowing you to refine by order cloud or XM Cloud, for example. And then finally, the site name, as we said. So if you want to be able to refine by where this actual data comes from. I'm not going to touch too much on filter today. I think the next thing we were going to hop over to was take a look at some index sources. So if we look on the left here, we have this menu item for sources. And this is where all the different sources for your basically, for your instances are configured. As I said, we're still working on this community one here. I'm not going to touch too much on that today. But I am going to touch on a couple of different examples. We're going to start with a really simple example, and then we're going to move over and look at a more complex one. So the first one we're going to look at is the Sitecore developer portal itself. There's that. Up here. Okay. So we're going to click on this and we'll load it up. And this is using a web crawler. So what that means is it's going to go and we'll give it a URL, and it will then go and crawl all of the data to get all the other URLs from that. If we go and look in here, we can see we have some basic text data. So we have the name, the description of the site, and the connector type. Moving on, we can then start to set some web crawler settings. So allowed domains is an important one for us. As I mentioned before, the developer portal is a shooting off point for all the different content repositories that Sitecore has. So we refine this index source to only index links from developers.sitecore.com. We are going to include those different content repositories, but we're going to include those in different index source definitions, which we'll look at shortly. This index source definition is only pages on the developer portal itself. From here, you just get some general refinement settings. So, you can set the max depth if you're going to crawl through the site. You can set a maximum of URLs you want to store. Parallelism is, I always struggle to say that word, yeah. That's basically how many crawlers you want to run at once. The general gist of it is, the more workers you run, the faster the site will be crawled. So if you have a site with a large number of documents, you probably want a high number of parallelism workers. There is a caveat to that, and that is that some sites some sites don't like you doing that. Don't like you to do that. We index Sitecore Stack Exchange for one of ours, and there are tens of thousands of messages in there indexed. But we can't have a high parallelism setting there because we kept getting rate limited. They thought we were like trying to DDoS them or something. So we've had to keep the parallelism low for that one, even though there's a high number of documents. And we just have to accept a slower total crawl time, basically. Some other interesting settings here, the timeout, how long to wait for each page to load. And you can also, make sure you're enabling cookies and whether you want to render JavaScript as well. So if it's a site where JavaScript's needed to pull in the content, you can set it to actually render the JavaScript and how long to wait for all this to last. I'm not going to change any settings for that. Once we get through the basic settings, then we're going to start to configure how this index source works. And the first thing you're setting up is a trigger. So a trigger is basically what kicks off the initial request to do the indexing. And you can see you've got a few different types in the web trigger. So you can make a JavaScript request, you can request an RSS URL, you can just request a URL, so just request the homepage. If you're going to crawl through the site manually through the DOM, that is the one you'd select. In this case, we're using a sitemap. Sitemap and RSS are probably the easiest because they contain all your URLs for you. You don't have to go and find them at all. So if you find a source with a sitemap or an RSS feed, they're going to be the easiest sources for you to work with. So we have a sitemap in here, and it changed when I selected that, but you can see, so developers.sitecore.com. I'm going to take a quick look at that. Here you can see it is just purely an XML document with all the different pages that we're going to want to index in there. Okay. So after we've got our trigger set up, that is going to get us the list of all the URLs on the developer portal that we want to index. The next thing we need to do is we need to find a way to map the DOM that's returned for those URLs to those attributes that we specified before. And that's what you use a document extractor for. So the trigger is going to get you the list of URLs. Each URL that's returned will then trigger a document extractor. If we look in here, we're using a JavaScript extractor. We'll look in that in a second. But you can see we're basically just using one. So every page here is going to match this single extractor that we have. And the reason for this is that the code and the markup in the developer site is really, really consistent. So it means we don't have to have any logic in here to handle different sections of the site differently. We can handle it all in one way. And when you do that, you can basically write JavaScript like this, which is pretty cool. You get a request object coming in. So you basically store the body of the object. And then you can just perform operations on that content to populate your fields. So we basically have a bit of logic in here, for example, for the image URL. So we check whether the OG image meta tag has been populated. And if not, then we'll just use a default fallback one we have set up. We say the URL itself that the page exists at. And one of the key things for us on the dev portal is having a consistently reproducible URL. And that's important for the eventing piece, which we'll talk about in a little while. But we basically have the ID as the URL itself, but we just remove any spaces, white spaces, and replace them with underscore, basically. That's what this regex replace is doing. Then we basically just build up and return a JavaScript object. So the ID, the type, remember the type field we specified before, this is one of the required ones. So the dev portal pages, they're all classed as articles. Then we have the name. So we're going to go and we're going to get the content of the OG meta tag. And that's going to be the name for this article. The description, again, we get the meta tag for the description. We have a priority integer set for each of our sources. And the idea being that with this being a developer portal, we wanted to surface developer content higher up because it's going to be more relevant. So we have a higher priority set for content on the dev portal, for example, compared to like Sitecore.com, which is a little bit more marketer focused. We set things like the image URL, the index name, which is Sitecore dev portal, and the site name, as we said, is the friendly version. And then, as we said, remember, we're setting the body text here so that we can do a full body text search across that document. Okay, once you've configured your document extractor, kind of the last thing you're going to be doing is set up the scan frequency. So here we do a daily scan for this index. I think we do that for most of ours, to be honest with you. We don't have any super mission critical data that has to be out to the minute or anything. So we just set up a daily scan that can happen at any time, really. Yeah, so 24 hours is enough kind of data freshness for us. Okay, so that is a really simple version. Let's go and look at something a little more complex. Let's go and look at the Sitecore documentation site. Okay, so this is where things start to get a little funky. I'm going to skip through most of these settings. They're pretty similar. Where things get interesting is where we get down to things like the triggers. So the Sitecore documentation site, I don't know if any of you have gone and looked through the sitemaps for there. I'm not sure why you would. But we actually have a different sitemap for each section. So there's a sitemap for the CDP docs, there's a sitemap for the XP docs, for Content Hub docs, for Order Club docs. But there isn't a sitemap index that pulls it all together, unfortunately. So we have to add all of these in individually, which means we end up with 12, I think it is, different triggers for the different sitemaps that are in here. On top of that, we then have different document extractors for each of those as well. And they're very similar, but they are slightly different. And the way it chooses which one to execute is through this regular expression. So before we were just matching every URL in the dev portal. Here, for example, we have the personalized document extractor, and that matches any URLs which have /personalized in them. If we look at the JavaScript content, very similar to before, but the advantage now being that we know this is only going to fire for documentation based on Sitecore personalized. So now we can populate that product field, and that's how we get the product facet to load the product data. So you can refine by Sitecore personalized content, for example. If we go and compare that to connect, you can see again, this time we're looking for connect in the URL. And if we go and expand the extractor, here we can see same article, same objects being coming back, but this time the product's been set to Sitecore Connect, and so on and so on. Okay, let's take a look at an API one, because that's a little different. What should we do? Let's do YouTube. Why not? Here we go. So it's similar, but a little different again. So you can go and look at the API crawler settings. So in here, you see, you can go how deep you want it, the max URLs, parallelisms here again. You can start passing in things like headers, which help as well. So we want to make sure we're getting JSON data back. And then we have all these different triggers. Currently, we haven't implemented paging on here yet. We're just requesting the first 12 pages, which is how we have this configured here with the token. I'm working with the product team to get this to work through iteratively in a loop instead. That's the next thing they're going to show us how to set up. But once you basically get the data back, again, it's very similar. We work with JavaScript in here once more, and we're just building out this object here. We get a JSON object back from the YouTube API, so we can go and look through that data and start to basically populate our object that returns. A couple of other things to look at in here. We also have these buttons on the top here. So recrawl and reindex. And then we have reindex. So what's the difference with these? Basically what happens when an index is crawled, that's going to go over to the source, request fresh data, pull it all down, and then it's going to build the index yourself internally for search and store it all away. So if you click recrawl and reindex, it's going to basically go and get everything afresh, all pulled down for you. We also have an option just to reindex. That isn't going to go back to the source. It's not going to go and get the data, raw data again. It's just going to rebuild the indexes based on the raw data that we pulled last time. You might wonder why you'd want to do that. Generally, it's if you change your attribute model. So say, for example, we wanted to make one of our fields facetable, which wasn't facetable before. Then you have to go and re-index your sources, basically, because that is what controls and builds up the faceting data. Okay, what else have we got in here? Oh yeah, I wanted to show you sort configuration. This is interesting. So we go back to our domain settings where we looked at before. We can take a look at our feature configuration. And I mentioned before that search pane, the search panel, is fully controllable within the CEC. And a lot of that's controlled within this feature configuration here. So if we go and take a look at our sorting options, you can see by default we choose to use suggested, and that uses this algorithmic sorting. That's basically us letting the AI choose the sort order. So it's going to put the articles at the top, which it most thinks matches your search key phrases, and the ones at the bottom, which it least thinks, obviously. But then we've started to build out some other ones. So newest. So we have this created RFK source created at, which is the date that the index document was basically created in search. So that allows us to do the newest and the oldest as well. So same one, but then we changed ascending to descending. And we also have title and ascending and descending as well, which again, we go from the name field and whether it's ascending or descending. So we can basically go and change this. We can add sorting options. We can remove sorting options, and all those changes will be instantly reflected on the end site. That kind of shows how you can get search data onto the site. But I also touched a little bit on analytics. I want to show you kind of what data we get back as well. If we go into our analytics here we can start to see which is our most popular content. So content views is an interesting one. Basically, how that works is whenever a page is viewed on the dev portal, we send a request back to search to say that somebody viewed it. That works really well for content we have on the dev portal. But remember, we're indexing all those 15 or so other sources. We can't get view data back from that. If someone goes and browses the doc site, we don't know that here. We don't have those requests coming back. So this top content here is just the top content on the main site, the dev portal itself. But you can see which pages are the most popular on there. You can see which pages are increasing in their view rate and which pages are decreasing. You might wonder why conversions is all empty. That will be the same across all of the reports in here. That's a hangover from Discover. So if you're working in Discover, a conversion is when someone utilizes search and then physically buys a product. Obviously, in search itself, there's no conversion as such, so we don't have that data. You can go into your Content Explorer here, and again, it starts to give you just a bit more deeper information about the content on the dev portal itself. So you can see there are 3,000 searches performed on the dev portal, how many views it had, how many clicks it went through it. The ones that I quite like, though, are the keyword analysis. This is what I mentioned before. So here we can actually start to see what searches people have entered. So this is over the last 7 days. You can obviously extend that time frame, but 7 days works pretty well for me, I think. I like to sort by searches. So this is the most used searches. So heaps of people are searching for order cloud prices. So how you handle pricing in order cloud. Profiles is very popular. XM cloud to be expected. Again, you can go down and start to get more data there. You can start to see which terms are increasing in use. The Sitecore Knowledge Search Knowledge Portal 4. That's interesting. You get some interesting results coming out of this. And which ones are declining? So XM Cloud's actually not quite as popular as it was the previous 7 days. Another one I quite like is null searches. So null searches is when someone performs a search that returns 0 results. So we can start to see what people are searching for that have given them no results back. We can see a lot of these are typing errors. So order cloud price of that I. Again, I think this is, well, those ones specifically are because we're working on a spell checking functionality to help with that. So I think some of these are my testing data, but a lot of these are actually legitimate searches that came back with no results. Again, you could use this data like quite usefully. So if you saw lots of people searching for the same term and getting no results, it probably means that you're probably missing some content really. So an opportunity to create some content based on that data and help the users get what they're after. Okay, so I think I'm going to hop back to some slides briefly and then we'll open it up to some questions. So I wanted to finish up by talking about some of the challenges that we went through. The first is debugging index failures. We had a lot of help from the product team because we were kind of early access with this. They're working on basically exposing the crawling logs in the CEC. So it's going to get a lot easier for you to figure out why a source wasn't crawled, why you've got no documents coming back. But at the minute, If you're starting a search project, you'll be assigned a technical account person, and you'll have to work pretty closely with those until that feature gets released soon. Kind of related to that, like refining crawlers is a very iterative process. Every crawler is going to be different that you create, every index source, but it's because every target site's different. And you basically go through this process of asking yourself the same question. Does this source have a sitemap that I can use? Because that'd be really easy. Do they have an API that can give me really explicit data back? Because that'd be easy as well. If not, then do we have to manually crawl the site? Do we have to go and pull the DOM down and start walking through those different anchors to get all the data? If you do you need to render JavaScript? You have to find the JavaScript on the site to get the DOM to render correctly. There's a little bit of an art to getting it right. It can be a little bit of a slow process the first couple of times you do it. But once you get the hang of it, it becomes a lot faster and you kind of know what to look out for to get things right. The same goes with the document extractors. Defining the attribute model, that big list of attributes, that's really straightforward. It's pretty easy to know what data you want to display in your search results. The tricky bit comes with finding all that data in your target sources you're working with. You'll find lots and lots of sites are unfortunately not very consistent in the data that they output. Maybe they'll have a meta description tag on some pages and it won't be on others. And so you're going to have to kind of work with that to massage the data into a format that you can work with. The final point that was raised to us by the product team is that the further you go through the results set, the less concrete the term matching becomes. So there's always a hard limit of 10,000 search results. You can't go past that. But really, you shouldn't want to either. You should be tailoring your UI to you don't want users just to be sat there paging through to like page 460. Because as we said, the term matching that far through gets less concrete. Instead, you want to kind of nudge them to refining the search term instead of just paging forever. So what does that mean? Well, it means you should try and get them to add more search terms through suggested search terms. You should get them to apply facets to narrow the results down, to change the sort order. Basically, you want them to go to paging as kind of a last resort. You want them to use the other ways of refining and reordering the data set first, because that's going to help them get to their content faster. Okay, I think that's kind of everything that I had to talk about today. As I said, the dev portal's live today, developers.sitecore.com. You can go and test search out over there. Does anyone have any questions, though?
Thank you, Rob. I have two questions. The first one, so the attributes and or the fields defined, are they shared between all sources, or can we define like these attributes per source?
Yeah, so it's a master set across all the sources. So
Okay.
that's what you say, it's a superset of every field that you want to be able to populate. Yeah.
Perfect. And for building that search UI, is React SDK the only option to build that front end, or do we have other options?
No. So React is the only SDK we have for it, but you could just use the API straight away natively. It's a REST API. Sitecore.com has search included as well. That's not a React application. It's Sitecore MXM site, so it's built with MVC, and they just use REST requests straight through to get the data. So the SDK, if you're in React or Next, makes life really easy, but you don't have to do it.
Are there like plans to build something similar to? I'm not sure if you're familiar with Coveo for Sitecore module. You know how we install that Coveo out of the box components and then we just drag drop to build the search UI. Like, are there like plans to build something like that?
Yes, so they're working on a native search to XM Cloud integration. That's going to be the main one that happens, I think. I'm not sure if that's going to get ported back to XM at all. I haven't heard about that, but I know they're working on, if people buy search and XM Cloud together, then how can they get it to basically work straight away out of the box? Yeah.
Perfect. That's all for me. I'm not sure anyone has any questions for Rob.
Hello, Rob. How are you? I have a couple of questions regarding the new search functionality. You mentioned like the Sitecore and the other Sitecore module. What about if we want to integrate with like other third-party system? How that will be working with the search here? Can we integrate it with other platform like other CMSs and use their
Yeah.
data within?
It's all just a REST API, basically.
Yeah.
So if you're working on, it can be integrated into any web page, really, regardless of what technology is on the back end powering it. You can create a search call, REST call over to search. It's not tied to Sitecore's CMSs in any way.
I mean the data, the source of data, not the exposed of the data. So exposed of the data is clearly like using REST API, so we can use it anywhere. But like, like the source of the data, can we have that in like database and crawling that?
You could use an API crawler to hit any web service. That could be calling a database on the back end. You can crawl any website that's available. You know, it's really up to you where you get your data from.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, just follow up on that. So the technique is to pull data, not to push data, right, Rob? Like,
so there's actually a push integration as well. So everything I talked about and everything we do on the dev portal is a pull. So we're basically going and pulling data. There is a push, it's not a crawler, push API, which basically means that it won't ever go and do a pull. You just basically keep pushing your data into that search index. We've had talks from people who are interested in using, for example, like the publish end webhook in 10.3 and XM Cloud. And you could use that to then link up to the push API. So as a document is published, it straight away gets pushed into your index. And then you don't have any lag time. Like I said, we've got like 24 hours. We only crawl once a day. If you use the push API in that way, your data would instantly be available in your index.
Yep, nice.
All right. So you've also mentioned at the beginning the YouTube, like searching via attributes. That's like a very cool feature because we're talking about attributes and metadata. Can we do the same on other types, like on PDFs and documents? Because that's the common, right? You tag your documents, you want to search the content, and you want to search also the metadata of these documents. Is that like an out of the box, or that's a custom crawler we will need to implement?
Yeah, so all out of the box. We don't do that on the dev portal, but Sitecore.com does that. They have heaps of PDFs in there, like case studies and things. As I mentioned, it's a bit more marketing-focused content, but they fully index all of their PDFs. So when you do a search on Sitecore.com, you'll be searching through all of the PDFs content as well that's on there, and all out of the box.
Nice. And we're actually been in a conversation with Sitecore for one of the clients, and like both Sitecore Search and Discover came in, especially that we're talking about, you know, replacing maybe Solar and Coveo. So do you see there's a, like, one comes over the other? Because I know with Discover we're talking about products, but this is how most of the websites have been configured in a classic experience. You have Solar generally for your main content and your site search, and then Coveo for a product. So where do you see this fit within the new ecosystem? Let's say if we want to have 10.3 and upgrade our, you know, XP integration with one of these products.
Yeah, sure. So it's not really a replacement for Solar. So Solar is used on the back end quite a lot. So it's used for building like your analytics index. It's used for like your master index for content editors. You're still going to need that Solar index if you're running XM and XP. This is purely just front-end search. So on the front of your site. So you probably wouldn't have Coveo and Sitecore Search together. There's too much overlap between those. They'd be doing the same job. But in that scenario, you'd still have Solar for searching within the CMS. It's not a replacement for that. This is just a replacement for your, well, not a replacement, but it's an implementation on your front end search, basically. That makes sense?
Yeah, I'm trying to digest that. Yeah, a little bit of a new concept, to be honest. That's why it's, yeah, especially when we're talking about federated search, right? So this is what many have been trying for years to implement and we never been successfully to realize like a full federated search. And yeah.
One question for me. I want to double check that which the version of Sitecore that's compatible with this search. Because like I remember one of our clients have like 9.2 or something. And is that compatible with this search functionality?
Yeah, you could put it over any Sitecore instance you want. Basically, because it's all external, you crawl the data to store it in search, and then you could be writing in MVC using the REST request. You could be in JSS in React.
So there is no limitation about the Sitecore version that we can use.
No, it's all completely separate. Yeah, as long as you can change your site to make the calls through to search, then yeah, you're good to go.
Okay, thank you. Sure.
Okay.
I'm quite sure there's gonna be more questions as we wrap our heads around this. So most probably we'll reach out to you. That's for sure.
Yeah, if you've got any questions after this, feel free to give me a shout. I'm available on the community Slack or all those different social channels that we looked at the start.
Sure, we will do that. Thank you, Rob.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks everyone for joining us today. Hopefully we'll have you in future sessions. Thank you, Rob, so much.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.